He said it loud enough for the whole platform to hear, loud enough that the station master turned, that the ranch hands stopped moving, that every man within earshot waited to see what the city woman would do. "A girl like that won't last 7 days." Margaret Ellison heard every word. She picked up her smallest bag, walked directly to the man who said it, and looked up at him without flinching. "Then you'd better hope," she said, "that I'm gone before I find out what's wrong with this ranch." She wasn't gone in 7 days. She found out everything. If you've ever been underestimated by someone who should have known better, stay with us. The stagecoach from Billings pulled in 12 minutes late, and Elias Thornton was already in a poor mood before it arrived. He stood at the edge of the platform with his foreman, a lean and cautious man named Holt Greer, and watched the dust cloud building on the southern road with the patience of a man who had learned that impatience cost money. He was expecting a new feed supplier's representative. He was not expecting what stepped off the coach. 3 bags came first, large, leather-sided, buckled with brass fittings that had no business within 50 miles of a working cattle operation. Then came a hat box. Then came the woman carrying the hat box. She was perhaps 27, with dark chestnut hair pinned under a traveling hat that matched her blue jacket. And she moved across the platform with the careful precision of someone accustomed to stepping around things that didn't belong in her path. Elias stared. Holt said nothing, but the silence between them said quite a lot. The woman looked around the platform, counted the bags being unloaded by the coachman, appeared to find the number satisfactory, and then turned in a slow, deliberate circle, taking in the unpainted depot, the mud-churned road, the feed sacks stacked against the far wall, and finally Elias himself. She walked straight toward him. "You're Elias Thornton." It was not a question. "I am Margaret Ellison." She extended her gloved hand. "My father held a stake in the Ellison parcel, the 40 acres north of your eastern fence line. He passed in February. I've come to manage the property." Elias did not shake the hand immediately. He looked at it, white glove, careful stitching, not a mark on it, and then looked back at her face. "You're the Ellison heir." "I am. I expected a lawyer. My father's lawyer died in March." There was a brief period of administrative confusion. She lowered her hand without embarrassment. "I'm here now. That resolves it." From somewhere behind Elias, one of the platform loaders, a young hand named Cord, who had no particular sense of occasion, said it just loud enough to be heard. "A girl like that won't last 7 days." Every man nearby went still. Margaret turned. She looked at Cord for a long moment, long enough that he shifted his weight, and then she picked up her smallest bag, walked 3 paces toward him, and stopped. "Then you'd better hope," she said, "that I'm gone before I find out what's wrong with this ranch." She turned back to Elias before Cord could answer. "Is there a wagon? I'd like to see the parcel before dark." Elias studied her for another moment. Then he said, "Holt, get the wagon." He said nothing else. But he watched her, the straight spine, the careful sway. She catalogued everything around her without appearing to look, and he filed it away in the part of his mind where he kept things that never yet have a name. The Ellison parcel was 40 acres of dry grass, 2 fence lines in poor repair, a small creek that ran low in summer, and a cabin that had not been occupied in 14 months. Margaret stood in the cabin doorway and made no sound for a full minute. Then she turned around and looked at Elias, who had driven the wagon and was now leaning against its side with his arms folded. "This is what my father bought. This is it." "For how much?" Elias told her. She was quiet again. "Was it worth that?" He didn't answer right away. And she noticed. "Tell me honestly. I'd rather know now than discover it later." "The creek makes it worth something," he said. "Access to water is worth something in a dry summer. The rest of it," he paused. "Your father paid Chicago prices for Montana land." She closed her eyes for one moment, then opened them all right. She walked past him to the fence line and ran her hand along the top rail, pressing down to test the wood. "This needs replacing. All of it. The roof? Patches will hold it another season. After that, you'd be wiser to re-roof." She turned and looked at the full sweep of the property, the low hills, the dry grass, the creek glinting silver in the late afternoon light. "Can it be made to produce anything?" "Hay, possibly. If the creek holds. I'll need access to tools, and someone who knows this land." Elias looked at her for a long time. "You're not selling it?" My father bought it. It's the only thing I have left of his decision-making. I'd like to honor it before I decide anything." Something shifted in Elias's expression, not warmth exactly, but a small withdrawal of the particular wariness he'd been wearing since the platform. He pushed off the wagon and walked to the fence line beside her. "The tools I can lend. The knowledge cost work." "What kind of work?" "The kind you've never done." She looked at him steadily. "Then I'll learn it." He said nothing, but he didn't walk away either. Thornton Ranch sat 3/4 of a mile west of the Ellison parcel, and Margaret came to understand its dimensions gradually, the way you come to understand a large room only after you've walked every corner of it. It ran more than 1,000 acres of working cattle land. A main house built solid and plain, a bunkhouse, a barn with a loft, and a series of outbuildings whose functions she had not yet identified. There were 7 hands on the payroll. Holt Greer ran them. They were polite to her in the careful, guarded way that men are polite to women they expect to leave. She understood this and said nothing about it. On the first morning, Elias gave her a tour that was efficient and unornamented: names of buildings, names of the 3 workhorses, names of the border sections. He spoke the way he did everything, without waste. She asked questions, he answered them. At the barn, he stopped at the milking pen and looked at her. "You said you'd work." "I did." He handed her a bucket. She looked at the cow. The cow looked back at her with the profound indifference of an animal that has made no promises to anyone. Margaret pulled the stool forward, sat down, and studied the situation with genuine concentration. "She's going to kick me." "Probably. Have you warned her that I'm not easily discouraged?" Elias's expression didn't change, but something behind his eyes did. "She's heard it before." Margaret set her jaw and got to work. The cow did not kick her, which Margaret chose to regard as a sign of mutual respect. She got approximately half the milk she was supposed to get, but she got it when she stood and carried the bucket to Elias. She held it out with the composure of a woman presenting a finished report. He looked at the bucket, looked at her. "It'll do for today." "I expected a more cooperative business partner," she said, tilting her head back toward the cow. Elias turned away before she could see whatever was happening to his face. She heard it anyway, a short sound, barely contained. That was the closest thing to a laugh she would get from him for several days. She filed that away too. The first week was a sequence of small disasters, most of which Margaret absorbed without complaint, and one of which nearly ended the entire arrangement. She burned the kitchen bread on Tuesday badly enough that Holt opened the door to see if the main house was on fire. She mismeasured the feed rations on Wednesday and gave 3 horses twice what they needed, which Elias discovered on Thursday morning and corrected without a word to her directly, which she found more unsettling than if he'd shouted. She fell off a horse on Friday. Not dramatically, it was a slow horse. A low fall, and she landed in a pile of cut grass that softened most of it, but the entire bunkhouse saw it. And by Friday evening, the story had been improved to include a fence jump and a stream crossing. She heard the version with the stream crossing from Cord, who told it to another hand without noticing she was 4 feet away. She waited until he finished. "For future reference," she said. "Without turning around, I fell in the grass, not the stream. Please update your account." Cord went very quiet. She walked to the house. Inside, she stood in the kitchen alone for a moment, with both hands on the work table. Breathing slowly, she had ridden horses before, city horses. Gentle horses, horses kept by families who valued predictability. She had not ridden a working ranch horse that responded to signals she had not been taught. She had not admitted this clearly enough before she got on. She needed to admit it now. She straightened up, went to find Elias, and found him at the water trough beside the barn. "I need someone to teach me to ride properly," she said. "The way you ride here, not the way I was taught." He turned slowly. "You're asking, yes, why not just keep falling until you get it?" "Because I don't have time to keep falling. And I think you know the difference between stubbornness that moves things forward and stubbornness that wastes everyone's time." He held her gaze for a moment. "Then tomorrow morning, before the others are up." She nodded. "Thank you." She turned to go. "Miss Ellison," she stopped. Asking was the right call. She didn't answer, but she felt something ease in her chest that had been tight since Friday morning. The riding lessons happened in the gray half-light before breakfast, when the ranch was quiet and the air still carried the cold of the night before. Elias was a different kind of teacher than she'd expected, not patient in the soft way, but patient in the way of someone who understands that a thing takes as long as it takes. He corrected her without apology, directly and specifically. "You're gripping with your knees. Stop, I'll fall. You won't. Trust the seat. I've been told to grip with my knees my whole life, by people who taught city riding. This is different." She released the grip. The horse moved under her, and she felt the difference immediately: less control. And somehow more. "Oh," she said quietly. Yeah, he watched her for the next 20 minutes without speaking. She worked through it: the adjustment, the uncertainty, the moment when the horse responded to a different signal, and she understood instinctively what she'd been doing wrong. On the 8th morning, she came out of a wide turn at a canter that was smooth enough to be almost elegant. Elias was standing at the fence. She pulled up beside him. "Better," he said. "Better than what?" "Better than a city rider." She looked at him. Was that a compliment? He turned and walked toward the barn. "Don't push it." She smiled at the back of his hat and said nothing. It was the end of the second week, when she first noticed something wrong with the feed supply. She'd been going over the ranch accounts. Elias had asked her to check a column of figures from the grain supplier. Nothing complicated, just a second set of eyes on the arithmetic, and she found the numbers added correctly. What she found was something else. The price per hundredweight of hay had increased 3 times in 8 weeks, small increases, each one within the range that might be explained by ordinary variance. But the pattern of them read together was not ordinary variance. She sat with the ledger open for a long time. Then she went to find Elias. He was in the barn, mending a length of harness, with the focused silence of a man who does physical work the way other men do thinking. "The feed prices," she said. He looked up. "They've gone up 3 times since June. Have you spoken to the supplier about it?" "Spoke to him last month." He said, "Drought pressure on the northern grass." "Is there drought pressure on the northern grass?" "Some. Enough to justify this." He set the harness down slowly. "Show me the numbers." She showed him. He studied them with the same focused silence he brought to everything. And she watched his expression move through something she could only call recognition, the look of a man who has been told a thing he almost already knew. "I need to look at the herd condition," he said. "I'll come." "You don't need to. You said the arithmetic was right." "It is." "Then the problem is something else. And 2 sets of eyes are worth more than one." He studied her for a moment. "Come on then." They went to the east pasture, where the main herd grazed, and Elias walked among the cattle with the ease of a man who knows every animal by name, checking their condition with his hands, reading their movement, stopping twice to examine an animal more closely. When he came back to where Margaret stood at the fence line, he was quiet for a longer time than usual. "They're thin," he said finally. "Not dangerously, but they've lost weight I can't account for by summer heat alone." "Bad feed," she said. "Maybe. Or something in it." He looked at her. "That's a serious allegation. I'm not alleging anything. I'm reading the pattern." She kept her voice level. "The price goes up, the quality comes down, the herd condition changes. Those 3 things together aren't coincidence." He looked back at the herd. "I know the supplier. He's not a dishonest man. Maybe he's not making the decision." Elias turned slowly. It was the first time she had seen him look genuinely uncertain, not the controlled uncertainty of a man weighing options, but the deeper kind, where the ground beneath a long-held assumption begins to move. "I'll need to go to town," he said. "Talk to him directly. I'd like to come." "Why?" "Because I've read the numbers, and you haven't. And 2 people reading a man's face is worth more than 1. He was quiet. "All right." She nodded, turned to go back toward the house. "Miss Ellison." She stopped for the second time in as many weeks at that word. "You didn't have to look that carefully at those numbers." She turned just far enough to see his profile. "My father trusted people to manage his money honestly, and he died with less than he should have had." She paused. "I look carefully at everything now." She walked back to the house. He stood at the fence a while longer before he followed. They went to town the next morning. Millard Creek was a working town, a general store, a land office, a hotel that doubled as a saloon on Friday evenings, a blacksmith, a feed and grain warehouse that backed up to the rail siding, and a bank. The bank had new paint on the front and brass fittings on the door. Margaret noticed the brass fittings. Elias went directly to the feed and grain warehouse, which was run by a man named Otto Bauer, a broad, deliberate German who had been supplying Thornton Ranch for 6 years and who greeted Elias with the comfortable ease of a long business relationship. He greeted Margaret with visible surprise. "Mrs. Sun, I did not expect. I've been reviewing the ranch accounts," she said pleasantly. "I hope you don't mind if I ask a few questions about the pricing." Otto looked at Elias. Elias said nothing, which meant answer her. Otto answered her. He explained the increases carefully and politely, citing the northern grass and the rail shipping costs and the unusual summer heat, and all of his explanations were plausible individually. Margaret listened to every word. Then she said, "Bauer, are you buying your supply from the same source you used in May?" A pause. Small, but she caught it. "My regular supplier." "Yes. And has he raised his prices to you in same proportion you've raised them to Mr. Thornton?" Another pause. "There have been adjustments. I'm asking about proportions." Her voice was still pleasant. "If your input cost went up 15% and you've billed Mr. Thornton an increase of 30%, the difference doesn't come from the grass drought." Otto looked at her for a long moment. Then he looked at Elias. Then he looked at the counter between them. "There was a man," he said slowly, "who came to me in June. Said he represented a new regional purchasing cooperative. Said if I switched part of my supply volume through him, he could offer me better rates. And you switched. I switched a portion, and the quality of what you received." He was quiet. "It was not always what I expected. I intended to correct it." "Who was the man?" Otto looked up. Elias was leaning forward now, both hands on the counter. Otto said the name A.H. Whitmore. "He runs the—" "I know who he runs," Elias said. His voice had gone flat and still in a way that Margaret had not heard before, not anger, but something cooler and older than anger. She looked at his profile and saw it. The thing that happens to a man's face when a shape he has been circling for a long time finally becomes visible. She said nothing, but she reached into her coat pocket and took out the small folded copy of the price ledger she had brought. She set it on the counter. "Mr. Bauer," she said, "I think you should keep this. It documents what you've been billed by this cooperative versus what you've billed Mr. Thornton. If anyone ever questions whether you were complicit in something, you'll want that record to show otherwise." Otto looked at the paper. He looked at her. "You came prepared, I came with numbers. Numbers are preparation." He picked up the paper carefully and put it in his vest pocket. Elias pushed back from the counter without a word and walked toward the door. Margaret followed. Outside on the wooden sidewalk, in the full blaze of Montana afternoon, Elias stopped walking and stood very still. She stopped beside him. He said, "Whitmore, you know him. He holds paper on 3 ranches in this valley. He's been trying to hold paper on mine for 2 years. And you've held him off." "I've held him off." She looked at the bank at the end of the street, the new paint, the brass fittings, the small sign that read H. "Whitmore Banking and Land. He's not after your debt," she said. "He's creating your debt." Elias looked at her. She met his gaze without stepping back. "The feed price goes up, your operating costs go up. Your margin shrinks, and when you miss a payment, even one he moves. That's what I'm thinking. Then we need to think faster than he does." He was quiet for a long moment. Around them, Millard Creek went on with its ordinary afternoon, a woman crossing to the dry goods store, a hand leading a horse past the livery, 2 men talking near the hotel porch. Nobody looking at Elias Thornton and Margaret Ellison could have seen anything unusual. But between them something had shifted. Not romance, not yet. Not named as such, but the particular thing that happens when 2 people who have been watching each other carefully finally watch the same thing and see it the same way. "We should go back," he said. "Yes." He started toward the wagon. She fell into step beside him. Neither of them spoke again until they were out of town and onto the open road. Then Margaret said, "One question. Ask it. Is there anything on this ranch that Whitmore could actually hold paper on? Any debt you haven't told me about?" He was quiet for a beat too long. She heard the beat, Elias. He kept his eyes on the road. "There's a note," he said. "Taken out in May. to cover feed cost after a bad spring. He paused. 70-day note. Due at the end of next month. She absorbed this. Held by. He didn't answer. She already knew. Whitmore's Bank. Whitmore's Bank. The wagon rolled on. She looked at the road ahead, the long, dry miles back to a ranch that was now something different than it had been this morning. Not smaller, but more clearly under threat, she said. Then we have less time than I thought. Yes, all right. She straightened on the seat. Tell me everything about the note, he told her. She listened, and when he finished, she did not panic. And she did not sympathize, and she did not offer soft words about how it would be fine. She said, I need to see the original document. He looked at her. You think he altered it, I think, she said carefully. That a man who rigs his feed supply to manufacture a debt does not take out an ordinary 70-day note and then wait to see what happens. The wagon hit a rut in the road. Neither of them reached for the rail. Elias Thornton looked at Margaret Ellison, the chestnut hair now fluthed at the temple from a full day's travel. The blue jacket that had no business in Montana, the hands folded in her lap with the stillness of a woman who is thinking very hard. He said nothing, but he was no longer thinking of her as a city girl. He was no longer thinking of her as a problem to manage. He was thinking of her the way a man thinks of someone who has just walked into a burning building beside him and shown no sign of leaving. And that was a different kind of thought entirely. The original note was locked in the bottom drawer of Elias's desk, inside a flat tin box that he'd kept there since May without opening it again. He set it on the kitchen table that evening. Margaret pulled the lamp closer, unfolded the document, and read it with the same careful quiet she brought to the ledger columns, methodical, unhurried, the way a woman reads something she already suspects will be worse than she hopes. It took her 4 minutes. Then she set it down and looked at him. Did you read this before you signed it? I read the main terms. 70 days, 8% interest, the ranch as collateral. Did you read the acceleration clause? He was quiet. Which one? She turned the document toward him and placed her finger at the bottom of the second page, on a paragraph written in smaller type than the rest. He read it. She watched his face. If the lender determines that the collateral property has materially declined in value, he read aloud, or that the borrower's capacity to repay has been materially impaired, the note becomes payable in full within 14 days of written notice. He set the paper down. He can call it early, whenever he decides your herd condition justifies it. She kept her voice even. And your herd has been losing weight for 8 weeks because his cooperative has been adulterating your feed supply. Elias stood up from the table and walked to the window. He stood there without speaking. Margaret gave him the moment. She understood that a man who has been building something for 20 years and just learned that someone has been quietly dismantling it from underneath needs a moment before he can think again. Then she said, he hasn't sent the notice yet. How do you know? Because if he had, you would have told me when you told me about the note. He turned. There was something in his expression that she had not seen before, not anger, not defeat, but the particular kind of hard-eyed focus that comes when a person stops hoping the situation is manageable and starts figuring out how to manage it anyway. How much time do we actually have? That depends on when he decides to use this clause. She folded her hands on the table. He could send the notice tomorrow. He could wait a week. It will depend on what he thinks you know. He doesn't know we went to Bauer today. Not yet. Bauer won't tell him. Bauer is afraid of him. That's different from loyal. She paused. We should assume Whitmore will know within 3 days. Elias was quiet for a long moment. Then, what are you thinking? She looked at him directly. I'm thinking that a man who has built this scheme, step by step, is not going to stop, because we know about the feed supply. He'll step over that and use the next thing. She paused. We need to find what the next thing is before he uses it. And how do you suggest we do that? I need to look at every document connected to this ranch. Every bill of sale, every land record, every contract you've signed in the last 3 years. She held his gaze. If he's been laying a foundation, it won't start with the feed. The feed is just the accelerant. The foundation was built earlier. Elias was quiet. That's 3 years of records, I know. It'll take days. Then we'd better start tonight. He looked at her for a long moment, the lamp between them. The document on the table, the whole weight of was bearing down on the ranch. sitting in the air between them like a third person in the room. "Why are you doing this?" he said. It was not unfriendly. It was genuinely asking. She met his eyes. "My parcel is 40 acres of dry grass and a cabin with a leaking roof." She paused. "The only thing that makes it worth anything at all is that it sits beside your water access and your fence line. If you lose this ranch, I lose everything my father left me." It was true. It was not the whole truth, but it was what she chose to say. He accepted it. "I'll get the files." They worked at the kitchen table until past midnight. Elias pulled records from the tin box, the desks, the back of the land office folder he kept in the closet, and Margaret sorted them into order, not the order they'd arrived in, but the order that told the clearest story, the way a woman accustomed to managing her father's correspondence knows how to turn a pile of paper into a sequence of events. Holt came in at 10 o'clock, saw the table covered in documents, and looked at Elias with an expression that asked a question without words. Elias said, "Miss Ellison is reviewing the land records." Holt looked at Margaret. "Is that necessary?" She kept her eyes on the document in front of her. "That depends on whether you'd like someone to find a problem before Whitmore uses it or after." Holt looked at Elias again. "She found the acceleration clause," Elias said, a pause. "I didn't know about that clause," Holt said carefully. "Neither did I." Holt pulled out a chair and sat down. "What do you need?" She looked up. "Who witnessed the land survey when your father bought this property?" Holt named a man. She wrote it down. "Is he still in the county?" "In 84. "Who has the survey records?" "County Land Office." "In Millard Creek, who runs the land office?" A pause. "Town council appointed a new man in the spring," Holt said slowly. "Fellow named Granger." "How long has he been there?" Holt looked at Elias. Elias said, "Since April. And before April, old Hennessy. He's retired, lives 2 miles east of town." Margaret wrote that down too. "I need to speak with Hennessy. He doesn't like visitors," Holt said. "He doesn't have to like me. He has to remember what the survey said." Holt leaned back in his chair and looked at this woman, the chestnut hair loose now after a long day, the jacket replaced by a cotton work blouse, the careful, precise way she moved through a stack of 30-year-old ranch records, like she was reading a letter she'd been expecting. "You've done this before," he said. "My father's estate took 14 months to settle. His lawyer was useless and then he died." She turned a page. "I learned to read documents because no one else was going to do it for me." Holt said nothing for a moment. Then he pushed his chair back. "I'll be here at first light. You can ride out to Hennessy together." He left without saying goodnight. Elias watched him go. That's the first time in 6 years I've seen Holt offer something before he was asked. She didn't look up from the records. "He's a practical man. He can see what's coming. So can I." He paused. "I'm not sure yet what to do about it." She looked up at that. He was watching her with the particular expression he'd had at the fence line 2 days ago, that careful, unguarded attention that he seemed to offer only when he thought she was focused elsewhere. "You'll figure it out," she said. "You built this ranch. I built it once. I may have to build it again. Then you'll know how the second time." He almost smiled. It wasn't quite a smile, but it was close enough that she looked back at her papers so she wouldn't stare at it. They found the first document problem at 11:15. She almost missed it. It was buried in a bill of sale from 3 years ago. A property boundary description that matched the survey in every respect except one coordinate. One reference point, written in different ink from the rest of the document. She set it beside the original survey. "Look at this." Elias looked. He looked at it for a long time. "That reference point," she said, "puts the eastern boundary of your property 40 feet inside where the original survey marked it. 40 feet. Which happens to run directly through the southeast corner of the property, where your access road meets the county road." He was very still. "If that boundary is recorded in the land office, then technically your access road runs partly across county land. Which means anyone who wanted to challenge your access rights could argue you've been trespassing for 3 years. He couldn't close the road. Not immediately. But he could tie it up in county court long enough to make the ranch difficult to operate, force legal costs, and give him reason to invoke the impaired capacity clause on the note." Elias pushed back from the table. He walked the length of the kitchen and back. "That change was made after I signed." "I believe so. Can you prove it?" "The ink is different." But ink can be argued. She kept her voice level. What I need is the original bill of sale, the one you signed. Not this copy. This is the copy I was given. Then the original is in the land office. She paused. In Millard Creek, under the new records manager who was appointed in April. The silence that followed was not empty. It was full of everything they both understood about what that meant. He put his man in the land office, Elias said. I think so. And changed the boundary record. I think so. And then manufactured the debt with the feed supply to trigger the acceleration clause. Yes. He turned and looked at her. He's been planning this for more than a year, at least. Possibly two. She folded her hands. He's thorough. And he's patient. And he is counting on the fact that you don't have anyone in your corner who reads documents the way he does. The lamp flickered slightly in a draft from the window. Neither of them moved. He didn't account for you, Elias said. She met his eyes. No, he didn't. Something passed between them in that moment, not declared, not named, but real. In the way that things are real when they happen between two people who have each been careful for too long and are suddenly in the same room with someone who sees exactly what they see. She looked back at the documents. He looked at her profile. Then he said, "Get some sleep. We ride at first light. I'll finish this section first, Margaret." It was the first time he had used her given name. She felt it, but she kept her eyes on the page. "An hour more," she said. "Then I'll sleep." He stood there for a moment longer than necessary. Then he took the lamp from the side table, set it closer to where she was working, and went to bed. She worked for exactly 1 more hour. Then she set the documents in order, folded her notes, and sat in the dark kitchen for a few minutes longer than she needed to. She was not thinking about the boundary record. She was thinking about the way he had said her name. She told herself she had no business thinking about that. And she was right, and it made no difference at all. Old Hennessy lived alone in a cabin that was in better repair than it looked, which Margaret noted as a sign of a man who had standards he kept privately. He answered the door with a rifle, which he lowered when he saw Holt, and then raised slightly when he saw Margaret, which she chose not to take personally. Who is she? Margaret Ellison. Her father held the 40 acres north of Thornton's eastern fence, the Chicago investment. Yes. He looked at her for a long moment, the rifle still at something between ready and resting. She held his gaze without stepping back. "I need to know what the original survey recorded for the Thornton eastern boundary," she said. "Specifically the southeast corner reference point. Why? Because I believe the recorded copy has been altered." He was quiet for 3 full seconds. Then he opened the door wider. "Come in." His cabin had shelves of record books along 2 walls organized in a system that was his own but clearly coherent. Because he went to one shelf without hesitation and pulled a volume from 1879. He opened it to a page and set it on the table. Margaret looked at the reference point. She pulled out her folded notes from the night before and set them beside it. She looked at both. Then she looked at Hennessy. "This is different from what's recorded at the land office now. Let me see." She showed him. He looked at the 2 reference points, the original in his private record book, the copy notation from the bill of sale, and his face went through something that was not surprise. "That man Granger," he said. "I knew something was wrong when they moved me out." "What do you mean?" "They didn't ask me to retire. They told me the county was restructuring the land office. New filing system. Needed a younger man for the transitions." He closed the record book. "I trained him myself for 6 weeks. I showed him every file. Every record." Margaret felt the chill of understanding before the words finished reaching her. "He saw everything you had. Everything. And he knew which records to change. He would have." She looked at Elias. He was standing very still against the far wall. "Mr. Hennessy," she said carefully, "would you be willing to put your original survey records in writing a sworn statement of what the boundary coordinates read before the land office transition?" He looked at her. "That would put me in direct opposition to Augustus Whitmore. Yes, he holds paper on my nephew's farm." The words fell into the room like stones into still water. She held the silence. "I know that's not a small thing," she said finally. "I'm not going to tell you it's easy, or that there won't be consequences. I'm going to tell you that the man being harmed right now is Elias Thornton. And the method being used is exactly the same one that will be used on your nephew's farm when Whitmore decides the time is right. Hennessy looked at Elias. Elias said nothing. He did not press. He understood. She thought what it cost a man to be asked for courage in his own kitchen. Hennessy looked at his record book. Give me until tomorrow morning. That's all I'm asking. She stood up. Holt stood up. Elias pushed off the wall. At the door. Hennessy said, Miss Ellison. She turned your father. The Chicago man. He came out here in '85 and looked at that parcel and decided to buy it even though anyone with sense could see it was overpriced. Yes. You're not him. She didn't know if it was a compliment. No, she said, I'm not. He closed the door. They walked to the horses in silence. When they were mounted and moving away from the cabin, Holt said quietly, to no one in particular, that's the first time I've seen Hennessy open his record books for anyone. Elias did not respond. But he looked at Margaret, and she, without looking back, was aware of it in the particular way that you become aware of a fire in the room not by looking at it, but by the warmth that suddenly exists on one side of your face. They were halfway back to the ranch when Elias pulled his horse to a stop. Holt pulled up beside him. Margaret pulled up beside Holt. Ahead of them on the road, coming out of Millard Creek at an unhurried pace, was a buggy with a single passenger, a man in a black suit with a vest carefully pressed and a hat brim set at the precise angle of someone who is always conscious of how he appears. Augustus Whitmore. He was not surprised to see them. That was the first thing Margaret registered. He was not surprised. Which meant he had known they would be on this road at this time. Which meant someone had told him. He pulled the buggy to a stop. Elias. He smiled with the warmth of a man who genuinely enjoys a conversation. And Miss Ellison, I've been meaning to introduce myself properly. Augustus Whitmore. I believe I knew your father in passing. I know who you are, she said. His smile did not change. I imagine you've formed some impressions. Small towns have a way of carrying stories. He looked at Elias. I wanted to ride out and speak with you directly. I've been hearing some concerns about feed supply quality in the valley this summer. I wanted you to know that if there's anything affecting the ranch's operating situation, my office would be happy to discuss extending flexibility on any outstanding obligations. The word flexibility landed in the air between them like a hand reaching for something valuable. Elias said nothing. Whitmore looked at him pleasantly. Waiting. Margaret said, that's generous. Whitmore turned his attention to her with the particular focus of a man who has just noticed that the door he thought was clear has a lock on it. I try to be a good neighbor. I'm sure you do. She kept her voice warm and Can I ask, is the flexibility you're offering a formal amendment to any existing note terms? Or is it more in the nature of a general expression of goodwill? A pause. Brief, controlled, but a pause. We'd discuss specifics through the office. Of course. Of course. Because a formal amendment would need to be documented. And a general expression of goodwill isn't binding on either party. She tilted her head slightly. I just want to make sure Mr. Thornton understands the difference. Whitmore looked at her for a moment. The warmth in his expression was unchanged, but something behind it had shifted the way the temperature in a room shifts when someone opens a window you didn't know was there. You're very precise, Miss Ellison. My father's estate required it. Admirable. He looked back at Elias. My offer stands. Come see me at your convenience. He clucked to his horse and the buggy rolled forward. Neither Elias nor Margaret moved until it was 50 yards down the road. Then Holt said very quietly, he knew we were at Hennessy's. Yes, Margaret said. Who would have told him? She was quiet for a moment. Someone who saw the wagon leave the ranch this morning and knew where Hennessy lives. She paused. Someone close enough to the ranch to notice. Holt and Elias looked at each other. She did not look at either of them. She was looking at the road ahead, straight and dry, and already heat shimmering in the late morning, and she was thinking about what it meant that Whitmore had ridden out to meet them personally. He was not rattled. He was not scrambling. He had known about the Hennessy visit before they returned from it, and he had come out not to threaten but to offer, which was more dangerous, because an offer could be used against them in ways a threat could not. He's watching this ranch, she said. He has been, Elias said. No. She turned to look at him. I mean, someone on this ranch is watching it for him. The silence that followed was a different kind than any they'd had before. Elias's face went hard and still. She held his gaze. "I don't know who," she said, "and I'm not going to name names until I do. But you need to be careful what you say and to whom." "Starting now." He was quiet for a long moment. "How long have you suspected?" Since he wasn't surprised to see us. He looked at the road. He looked at her. "All right," he said, "just that." But the way he said it, steady, certain, the word of a man who has just made a decision to trust someone fully. Not out of sentiment, but out of evidence reached somewhere in her chest that she had kept carefully closed for a long time. She turned her horse back toward the ranch. He turned his and rode beside her. And for the rest of the way home, neither of them needed to say anything more. The problem had gotten larger in the last hour, and somehow, inexplicably, she felt less afraid of it than she had at breakfast. She did not examine that too closely, but she felt it. The first thing Margaret did when they returned to the ranch was count the men. Not obviously. She did it the way she'd learned to read a room in Chicago, by noticing who was where, who had reason to be where they were, and who was standing somewhere that required an explanation they hadn't offered. 7 hands on the payroll. Holt made 8 if you counted him separately. She did. Cord was at the barn when they rode in, which was his usual place at that hour. 2 others were at the fence line on the north side, which was where they'd been sent that morning. 3 were in the bunkhouse for the midday break, which was ordinary. 1 was not where he was supposed to be. A hand named Devin Rask, quiet, 24, hired in March, was standing near the road gate when they came through it, doing nothing in particular, in a way that looked like he was trying to appear occupied. Margaret noted it and said nothing. She dismounted, handed her horse to Cord, and walked directly to the house. Inside, she went to her room and stood at the window, not looking at the view, but watching the yard below with the particular stillness of a woman whose mind is moving very fast. Rask had been hired in March. Granger had taken over the land office in April. She needed to know who had recommended Rask to Elias. She needed to know it without asking Elias directly. Because if she asked Elias directly and Rask was Whitmore's man, the question itself would be back in Whitmore's ear before nightfall. She turned from the window, went to the kitchen, and started making coffee. Holt came in 10 minutes later. He pulled out a chair and sat down without being invited, which she had come to understand was his version of trust. "You're thinking about Rask," he said. She looked at him. "Am I wrong?" "No." She poured 2 cups and set one in front of him. "Who brought him on?" Holt wrapped both hands around the cup. "Man named Foster, runs a small spread 8 miles south. Said Rask had worked for him 2 seasons, and he couldn't afford to keep him on. Do you know Foster? Known him 12 years. And Rask. What's your read?" Holt was quiet for a moment, the careful quiet of a man who has been thinking about the same question longer than she's been asking it. "He does his work," he said. "Doesn't complain. Doesn't ask questions." He paused. "Doesn't make friends. In a bunkhouse, that's either a man who keeps to himself or a man who doesn't plan to stay long enough to bother." She looked at him steadily. "Has he ever asked about the ranch's finances? The note? Anything connected to the bank?" Holt's jaw tightened. "Once. About 3 weeks ago. Asked me casual-like whether the spring had been hard enough to affect the operating situation." He set down the cup. "I thought he was just making conversation. 3 weeks ago is when the feed price increased for the 3rd time." The sound Holt made was not a word, but it carried the weight of several. "I need you to keep this between us," she said. "Not a word to anyone, not even Elias, not until I know more." Holt looked at her sharply. "Elias runs this ranch, and Elias will confront Rask the moment he knows, because that is what Elias does with a problem. He walks toward it." She kept her voice even. "If Rask runs back to Whitmore before we have Hennessy's statement in hand, we lose the timing we need." Holt was quiet. 48 hours, she said. "Give me 48 hours before anyone knows." He looked at her for a long time. "You're asking me to keep something from the man I've worked for 12 years. I'm asking you to protect him. That's different." Another long silence. 48 hours, he said finally. "Not a minute more." She nodded. He picked up his coffee again. "You do this kind of thing often. Managing a problem without letting the person involved see you managing it." She looked at her own cup. "My father was a proud man. He didn't like to know when he needed help. She paused. I learned how to help him without letting him see it. It was the only way to actually help him. Holt was quiet for a moment. Then he was lucky to have you. She didn't answer. But her hands, folded around the cup, held a little tighter. Hennessy arrived the next morning with a sealed envelope and the expression of a man who has slept badly because he made the right choice. He handed it to Margaret at the door. Sworn statement. The original survey coordinates for the Thornton eastern boundary. The reference point as it read in my records and my attestation that the entry in the current land office file does not match. Thank you, don't thank me. He looked past her into the house. Where's Thornton? He'll be back within the hour. He rode out early. Tell him that if this goes to county court, I'll stand up in it. I'm not signing a piece of paper and then disappearing. His voice was flat and certain. I'm 71 years old and I have nothing Whitmore can take that matters more than sleeping at night. She looked at him. I'll tell him. He turned to go. Mr. Hennessy, he stopped. Your nephew's farm. If this works, if we can expose what Whitmore's done there, maybe grounds to challenge other notes he holds. He turned back. I know it. Is that partly why you're doing this? He looked at her with the directness of a man who has been around long enough to stop pretending things aren't what they are. That's most of why I'm doing this. He paused. Does that trouble you? She considered it honestly. No, she said. Self-interest in the right direction is still the right direction. He almost... Your father was in the wrong business, he said. He should have been in law. He left. She stood in the doorway holding the sealed envelope and feeling the first solid thing she had held since they'd read the acceleration clause, a real document. A real witness. A real piece of the structure they needed to build. She did not allow herself to feel relieved. Relief was for people who had already won. They had not won anything yet. Elias turned from the east pasture at mid-morning, and she met him at the barn before he'd dismounted. She held up the envelope. He looked at it, then at her. Hennessy came through. He came himself. He says he'll stand up in court if it goes that far. He got down from the horse slowly, took the envelope from her and opened it. He read the statement twice. Then he folded it carefully and looked at the sky for a moment, not dramatically. Just the way a person looks at something neutral when they need a second before they speak. This is real, he said. It's real. It doesn't solve the note, no. But it separates the boundary problem from the debt problem. Which means when he tries to invoke the acceleration clause based on herd condition, we can show the herd condition was manufactured, and when he tries to use the boundary record as additional grounds, we have the original survey to contradict it. 2 lines of defense, 2 lines of attack. She corrected it evenly. We're not defending. We're presenting evidence that his foundation is fraudulent. He looked at her. You've been thinking about this since last night. Since the land office, she said honestly. He was quiet for a moment. We need a lawyer. We need the right lawyer. Not someone from Millard Creek. No. Someone Whitmore doesn't have a relationship with. Someone from Billings. Or farther. Someone with no local obligations. She paused. Do you know anyone? He thought. There's a man in Billings, Aldous Grant. He handled a land dispute for a rancher west of here 2 years ago. He's not cheap. How much? He told her. She calculated quietly. I can cover a portion from my father's estate. Not all of it. He looked at her sharply. That's your inheritance. It's my investment. She kept her voice steady. If your ranch goes under, my parcel is worthless. This is a practical decision. He shook his head. Margaret, don't, she said it quietly but firmly. Don't tell me I don't need to do this. I know what I need to do. He stopped. Looked at her. Something moved across his face, not gratitude exactly, which would have been too simple, but a kind of recognition that was larger than gratitude. The kind that happens when you understand that someone's standing beside you is not doing it because they have to. All right, he said. She nodded. Write to Grant today. Tell him we need him within the week. I'll write this afternoon. Good. She turned toward the house. And Elias, she stopped without turning fully. Rask. Where did you send him today? A pause. North Fence. Why? Keep him away from town for the next 2 days if you can. She heard him go very still behind her. What do you know? Not enough yet. 2 days. Another pause, longer this time. Taut with the effort of a man holding back a direct question. 2 days, he said. She walked to the house, She felt him watching her, and told herself it was only the awareness of a solved problem. The practical relief of knowing he'd given her the time she needed. She was not entirely convincing. It was Cord who confirmed it. Not deliberately, Cord had no subtlety and no filter, which made him the most reliable source of information on the ranch, because he could not help telling what he knew to whoever was near him. She found him at the water trough mid-afternoon, complaining to one of the other hands about the north fence assignment. "Rask been trying to get out of it since morning," Cord was saying. "Says he needs to go into town for a personal matter." Holt told him no. He's been dark about it ever since. Margaret paused at the edge of hearing. "What kind of personal matter?" the other hand said. He didn't say. But he's been like this twice before, both times right after something happened on the ranch that'd be interesting to a certain kind of person. A pause. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying I'm not saying anything." Cord's voice dropped. "I'm saying the timing bothers me, and I've been bothered about it for a month." She walked past without stopping. She went directly to Holt. "It's Rask." Cord's had the same suspicion for a month. Holt looked at her. "That's two of us. Three. I need you to send him to the far south pasture tomorrow. Something takes and keeps him from reaching anyone before we're ready, and when we're ready. We confront Whitmore directly. Not through a lawyer, yet directly, face to face. Before he sends the notice." Holt stared at her. "That is not a plan. That is walking into the mouth of the problem. It is the plan. Because Whitmore thinks he has complete control of the timing. If we walk into his office with Hennessy's statement and evidence of the feed manipulation, we take the timing away from him." She held Holt's gaze. "He cannot send the acceleration notice if we're sitting across his desk, showing him that every piece of his foundation can be exposed in county court. He could deny everything. He could. But a man like Whitmore does not like exposure. He does not like his name attached to fraud in a public filing. He will negotiate before he risks that. And if he doesn't, then we go to court with Hennessy's statement and the feed records, and we let the county judge decide." She paused. "But I don't think it goes to court." Holt rubbed his jaw. "Does Elias know you're planning to walk into Whitmore's bank?" "Not yet." "He won't like it." "No. He'll want to go with you." She had already thought about this. "I know, and I'm going alone." The silence that followed was the particular kind that comes when a practical man encounters something he thinks is both wrong and probably right. "Why alone?" Holt said finally. "Because two people walking into that office look like a confrontation. One person, a woman from Chicago, who appears to be making a social call, looks like something he can manage." She kept her voice level. "He will underestimate me, and I would like him to keep doing that for exactly as long as it takes." Holt looked at her for a long moment. "Your father really should have put you in law," he said. It was the second time she'd heard it in 2 days. She didn't smile, but she wanted to. She told Elias that evening. She waited until after supper, when the ranch was settling into its night quiet, and the two of them were at the kitchen table, with the documents spread between them, by now a familiar arrangement. The lamp between them, the papers in order, the particular domestic intimacy of two people working toward the same difficult thing. She said, "I'm going to see Whitmore tomorrow." He looked up from the page he was reading. "We agreed to wait for Grant. Grant will take a week to arrive. The notice could come before then." She kept her voice steady. "If I go tomorrow before he sends it, we preserve our position. Once the notice is served, we're in a defensive posture and he controls the timeline. I'll go with you." "No." He set down the paper. "Margaret Elias." She matched his tone exactly. "If you walk into his bank, he sees a rancher in trouble who is angry and looking for a fight. He will be measured and polite, and he will end the meeting in 5 minutes with nothing given and nothing promised." She held his gaze. "If I walk in alone, he sees a city woman who doesn't fully understand the situation and who might be managed with a little charm. He will talk longer. He will explain more than he means to. And I will learn something we can use." He was quiet. She could see him working through it, the part of him that wanted to stand between her and this problem, and the part of him that had been watching her for 3 weeks, and knew, with the particular certainty of a man who has been paying close attention, that she was right. "He's dangerous," Elias said. "I know. Not physically. But he can make things difficult for you too. Your parcel. My parcel is already tangled up in this, whether I go tomorrow or not. She paused. This is my decision to make. He looked at her for a long time. She did not look away. Take the statement with you, he said finally. The copy, not Hennessy's original. Let him see that you have it. But don't leave it with him. I wasn't going to leave it with him. And if he Elias. She said his name the way he had said hers, quietly. Directly, with the weight of someone who means for a conversation to stop escalating. I've been managing difficult men since I was 19 years old. I know how to walk out of a room. He held her gaze. Something moved in his expression, something that had been building for days and was still not named. Still not spoken, but that existed now in the space between them, as clearly as the lamp or the papers or the weight of everything they were both carrying. Come back, he said. It was not instructions, it was not strategy. It was just those two words, in a voice that was quieter than everything else he'd said that evening. She felt them land. I will, she said. She gathered the copy of Hennessy's statement, folded it into her coat pocket, and went to her room. She did not sleep well, but it was not fear that kept her awake. She was up before dawn. She dressed carefully the blue jacket, which she had pressed the night before, the good hat, the white gloves that had no business in Montana and were therefore exactly right for this particular morning. She went to the kitchen to make coffee. Elias was already there. He was sitting at the table with a cup in front of him, and he looked at her when she came in the jacket, the gloves, the hat already pinned, and he did not say anything. She poured herself a cup and stood at the counter. You slept, she said. Some. The letter to Grant, did you finish it? Sent Holt to post it last night. She nodded. A silence that was not uncomfortable. Then he said, My father lost 40 acres to a man like Whitmore. Not through force, through paper. He looked at the cup in his hands. He never recovered from it. Not financially we rebuilt. But he never trusted a document again. He never signed anything without his hand shaking. She was quiet. That's why you didn't read the fine print, she said. Not a judgment. Just understanding. I saw the main terms. I thought I knew what I was signing. He paused. I didn't look for the thing I didn't know to look for. That's how they do it. Yes. She looked at him across the kitchen. This careful, private man who had just told her the shape of his deepest wound. Not as a confession, but as an explanation. The way you explain something to someone you trust to understand it, without requiring it to be larger than it is. I'll be back before the afternoon milking, she said. He looked up. The corner of his mouth moved that same, barely there thing that wasn't quite a smile, but was something she had come to look for. She'll be unmanageable if you're late, he said. She's always unmanageable. You've improved. She looked at him. Was that another compliment? He stood up, picked up his cup, and walked toward the door. Don't push it, he said. She heard it differently this time than the first time he'd said it. She let herself smile only after he was gone. Then she picked up her coat, put Hennessy's statement in the pocket, and walked out to the wagon. The road to Millard Creek was already warm in the early sun, and she drove it alone, thinking about everything she knew and everything she was about to do with it. She was afraid. She understood that the fear was appropriate, and she did not argue with it. She drove into Millard Creek, tied the wagon outside the bank, straightened her jacket, and walked through the brass-fitted door as if she owned the floor beneath her feet. Augustus Whitmore looked up from his desk when she entered. For one single instant before the charm assembled itself back into place, she saw it. Surprised, she smiled at him. Mr. Whitmore, I hope I'm not interrupting. I thought it was time we spoke directly. She sat down across from him without being invited, and she set the folded copy of Hennessy's statement on the desk between them, where he could see it but could not reach it without crossing her. He looked at it. He looked at her. The smile he put on was impeccable. But his hands, she noticed, had stopped moving. Whitmore looked at the folded paper on the desk for exactly 3 seconds. Then he looked at Margaret, and his smile returned to its full warmth. And he said, Miss Ellison, what a pleasant surprise. Please, can I offer you anything? Coffee? Water? Nothing. Thank you. Then let's talk. He leaned back in his chair with the ease of a man sitting in his own parlor. I imagine you've come about the Thornton matter. I've come about several matters. She kept her hands in her lap. Still relaxed, but yes, we can begin there. Elias is a good man. I've had nothing but respect for what he's built out on that property. He shook his head with what appeared to be genuine regret. It's been a difficult summer for everyone. The feed situation. The feed situation, she said pleasantly, is what I'd like to discuss first. He waited. You introduced a purchasing cooperative to Otto Bauer in June. Through that cooperative, the feed supplied to Thornton Ranch has been of measurably lower quality than what Mr. Bauer was billing for. She paused. I have the billing record, the price comparisons, and Mr. Bauer's own account of the arrangement. Whitmore's expression did not change. That itself was information. A man who was surprised would have shown it. A man who was caught would have deflected immediately. Whitmore did neither. He simply looked at her with the attentive patience of someone who is listening to a presentation he already knows the shape of. Otto is a good man, he said, but small suppliers sometimes get caught up in arrangements they don't fully understand. If there were quality problems with the cooperative's product, that would be between Otto and his supplier. Except the cooperative was your arrangement. A business interest I have a small stake in. Yes, I have stakes in many things. He spread his hands. A lower quality product reaching Otto Bauer is not something I would have sanctioned or even known about. She had expected this. Then you'll have no objection to the matter being raised at the county level. A simple inquiry into the cooperative's sourcing and quality standards. A pause. Fractional. Controlled, but there, of course not. If there's been a quality problem, it should be addressed. His voice was smooth. I have to say, Miss Ellison, you're very well prepared for someone who arrived in Montana only 3 weeks ago. I've had good reasons to prepare quickly. He looked at the folded paper between them. Is that the Hennessy statement? She did not ask how he knew about it. She didn't need to. He'd had Rask in position since March. He'd known about Hennessy the day they visited. It is, she said. Old Hennessy is a fine man, but he's been out of the land office for years. His records may not reflect the most current. His records reflect the original survey. She kept her voice even. The reference point in the current land office file does not match the original. We have both documents. He looked at her. For the first time. The smile shifted, not disappeared, but changed quality. Became something narrower and more deliberate. Let me be direct with you, he said. Please. What is it you're hoping to achieve today? A renegotiation of the note terms. A withdrawal of the cooperative arrangement. Something else. A withdrawal of the acceleration clause. A restoration of the original boundary record. And an end to the cooperative supply contract with Bauer. He was quiet for a moment. That's a significant ask. It's a fair one, given the circumstances. The circumstances, as you describe them, are not documented in any formal proceeding. Not yet. And if they were to become part of a formal proceeding. He paused. These things take time. County courts move slowly. And in the meantime, notes come due. She understood what he was saying. He was telling her that even if everything she had was real, he could outlast her in a legal process. He had more money, more connections, and more patience than a woman who'd been in the territory 3 weeks. He was probably right. She had known he would say something like this. She had prepared for it, Mr. Whitmore, she said. I came here this morning because I believed you were a practical man. She folded her hands. A formal proceeding would expose the cooperative arrangement, the land record discrepancy, and the acceleration clause in a county where you hold notes on a significant number of properties. The moment that exposure becomes public, every man in this valley who owes you money is going to look at his own documents differently. She let that sit. You could outlast one lawsuit, she said. I don't think you want 15 of them. He looked at her. The smile was entirely gone now. What replaced it was something she had not seen before, not anger, but assessment, pure, cold, calculating assessment. The look of a man who has just discovered that the woman across his desk is not, in fact, the manageable problem he'd assumed. Then he opened the center drawer of his desk. He took out a document and set it on the desk beside Hennessy's statement. Before we discuss terms, he said, I think there's something you should see. She looked at the document. It was a lien notice on the Ellison parcel, her 40 acres. She picked it up. She read it. Her father had taken out a small loan 6 months before he died, a loan she had not known about. against the parcel he'd bought in Montana through a land investment office in Chicago that she now recognized. Reading the fine print at the bottom of the page, as a subsidiary of the same cooperative that supplied Otto Bauer. Whitmore had held paper on her parcel before she ever stepped off the stagecoach. He had known who she was. He had known she was coming. He had let her arrive and settle in and spend 3 weeks building a case, and he had waited. The patient as winter for exactly this moment. She set the document down. She looked at him. "Your father was a good man," Whitmore said. "Not unkindly, but not a careful one. He took a short-term loan to cover the purchase costs of the parcel. It matured in April. It was not paid because no one knew about it. Which means it's now technically in default." He paused. "Both properties, Miss Ellison. Not just Thornton Ranch." The room was very quiet. She was aware of every sound: the clock on the wall, a horse passing in the street outside, her own breathing, which she was keeping very deliberately steady. She had come in here thinking she held the lever. She had been the one being levered. She looked at him. "What do you want?" she said. It was the first sentence she had spoken without preparation. And she heard the difference in her own voice, not panic, but the sound of someone who has just had the ground shift and has not yet found the new footing. Whitmore settled back. "The same thing I've always wanted. The Thornton property. At a fair market price." He paused. "Elias is a proud man. He won't sell while he thinks he can fight. But if the note is called and the boundary dispute ties up his access rights, and if your parcel reverts to me through the default, the math becomes very simple." He looked at her almost gently. "I don't want to destroy anyone, Miss Ellison. I want the land. I'm willing to pay for it. At your price, at a fair price. I'm not a cruel man." She looked at him for a long moment. Then she stood up. She picked up Hennessy's statement. She left the lien notice on the desk. "Thank you for your time," she said. He rose as she did. "Courtesy, always courtesy, Miss Ellison. There is a version of this where everyone walks away with something." She looked at him from the door. "I'll keep that in mind." She walked out. She got to the wagon, sat down and gripped the reins with both hands for a full 30 seconds before she trusted her voice enough to speak. Not that there was anyone to speak to, but she needed to know she had it back before she reached the ranch. She had it. She drove. Elias was at the barn when she pulled in. He came to the wagon before she'd tied off. She saw him read her face from 20 feet away, the way a man reads weather on the horizon, and she watched him go from watchful to something harder and quieter in the span of a single step. What happened? She climbed down and handed him the reins. "He didn't fold," she said. "He escalated." She told him about the lien. She told him about her father's loan. She told him about the subsidiary, the default, and what Whitmore had said with his hands folded on his desk, like a man reading a scripture he'd written himself. Elias listened without interrupting. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment that was not empty. It was dense and still, the way air goes before a storm. "He planned this before you arrived," he said. "Before I arrived, before my father died, possibly. He knew what the parcel was worth to whoever controlled this valley's water access. He may have known my father would need a loan to close the purchase." She paused. "He's been patient for a long time." Elias set down the reins. "Margaret, the lien on your parcel, can it be contested? If the loan documentation can be found and examined. If the subsidiary's relationship to the cooperative can be established in writing. If we can show that the loan terms were predatory and connected to the same scheme targeting the ranch." She looked at him. "It can be contested. It will take time and money. Time and money we don't have. Not the way we've been thinking about this." He turned slightly, and she saw his jaw working, the thing he did when he was thinking hard and holding the thought in rather than giving it air. "Holt needs to know," he said. "Yes. And Rask is gone." She looked at him. "I sent him this morning," Elias said, "after you left. I told him to go to Foster's spread and stay there. I told him I knew." "How?" "I've been watching him since you told me to keep him from town." His voice was even. "I don't need proof for a termination. I need my own judgment." She absorbed this. "He'll go straight to Whitmore." "I know. Which means Whitmore knows we're moving faster than he expected. Which means we need to move faster than that." He turned and walked toward the house. "Come on. Holt needs to hear this, and we need to think." She followed. They gathered in the kitchen. Elias Holt and Margaret, with the documents spread ostentable for the third time in as many days. But now with a different weight to them. Holt looked at the lean notice, which Margaret had written out from memory. He looked at Elias. He had her coming and going before she stepped off the coach. Yes. So the question is what we have that he didn't plan for. Hennessy's statement, Margaret said. He knew about it. Rask told him we went there, but he didn't know what was in it until I put it on his desk this morning. His reaction told me that. What was his reaction? Holt said. He knew the name. He didn't know the content. She paused. He tried to preempt it by calling Hennessy's current record-keeping into question. Which means he didn't think the original survey was still documented anywhere. He thought Hennessy was just a memory, Elias said. Yes. And a man's memory against a filed land record is not much to take to court. But a man's written record, his own private copy of the original survey, is something else. Exactly. She looked at the table. He doesn't know what Hennessy's statement actually says. He thinks it's Hennessy's recollection. He doesn't know it references Hennessy's own record books. Holt leaned forward. That's the gap. That's the gap. She looked at him. And there's one more thing. The subsidiary. He connected my father to it. But if that subsidiary is the same entity channeling the cooperative's product to Bauer, and if we can document that connection formally, we don't just have a land dispute. We have evidence of a coordinated scheme to defraud multiple parties. That's not a county court matter, Elias said slowly. No, she held his gaze. That is a territorial matter. The kitchen went quiet. It was Holt who said it first. Territorial court. That's above Whitmore's reach, it is. She paused. But we need the documentation. The subsidiary's filing records. The cooperative's contract with Bauer. The connection between the two, we need it in writing. From a source outside this county, Chicago, Elias said. She looked at him. My father's papers, she said. Whatever documentation he has of the loan, the subsidiary name, the terms, the correspondence, if any of that is in his estate files, is it accessible? His attorney's estate is being handled by a firm in Chicago. I have a contact there. A woman, my father's housekeeper, Mrs. Aldred, who has been holding his papers until I decide what to do with the house. She paused. If I write to her today, and she can find the loan correspondence, and if the subsidiary name appears in it. How long? Holt said. 10 days minimum. Probably 2 weeks for post in both directions. We don't have 2 weeks before the note comes due. No. Silence. Elias stood up from the table and walked to the window. He stood there for a moment. Then he turned. Grant, he said. The lawyer. He can file for an injunction to halt the note while the fraud claim is being investigated. He doesn't need the Chicago documents to file. He needs enough to argue reasonable cause for delay. Margaret looked at him. Does he have enough? He has Hennessy's statement. He has Bauer's account of the cooperative. He has the billing records. Elias looked at her steadily. Does that constitute reasonable cause? She thought about it honestly. It might, she said. A territorial-level claim of coordinated fraud. Supported by a sworn statement from a former land office official and a supplier's testimony, a competent judge would grant a temporary halt. And that gives us time for the Chicago documents, if they exist. Write to Mrs. Aldred today, he said. Right now. I'll ride to meet Grant Stage, he said. He could be here by Friday. That's 4 days, I know. She was already moving toward the writing desk in the corner of the room. Holt pushed back from the table. I'll keep the ranch running, he said simply. It was not a small thing, and all three of them knew it. He said it as if it were, and she understood that was its own kind of strength. He left. Margaret sat at the desk and pulled paper forward. Elias came and stood beside her, not close enough to intrude, but close enough that she was aware of him the way you are aware of warmth from something you aren't looking at directly. What do you need? He said. The address of the estate firm in Chicago. And Mrs. Aldred's address if you have it. I have it somewhere, but I'd lose time looking. I don't have it. Then I have it. Give me a moment. She found it in the small travel notebook she'd kept since her father's death, the one that held names and addresses and amounts and dates. The whole compressed landscape of grief turned into logistics. She wrote the letter to Mrs. Aldred carefully, precisely, asking for any correspondence connected to a Montana land purchase loan, any document carrying the name of the subsidiary, any receipt or letter signed in the 6 months before her father died. She wrote a second letter to the Chicago estate firm. Requesting the same, she sealed both. She turned around. Elias was watching her. He had been watching her write. She realized not reading the letter, just watching her work. With the look of a man who has been watching someone for 3 weeks and has stopped pretending to himself that it is merely practical. "She's going to kick me," she said. He blinked, Mrs. Aldred. "She's going to be furious that I've involved her in this from a distance without warning. She worries. Sounds like someone who cares about you." "She raised me," Margaret said. "After my mother died, my father paid her to keep the house. But she stayed because she chose to." He was quiet for a moment. "You don't talk about your father much," he said, "except in relation to the parcel." She looked at the sealed letters in her hands. "He was a good man," she said, "optimistic. He believed that the right investment in the right place could change a family situation permanently." She paused. "He wasn't wrong about the idea. He trusted the wrong people to tell him which place." Elias was very still. "That's what I said about my father." She looked up. He met her eyes. "Not in those words," he said. "But that's what happened to him. He trusted the wrong man to tell him which document was safe to sign." They looked at each other across the kitchen, the letters in her hands. The whole weight of what they were both carrying, the particular understanding that passes between two people who have each had something important taken from them by the same kind of patient. Calculating cruelty, she said, "We're going to stop him. Not we can or we might. Just we are." "Yes," he said. Then, before either of them could name what was happening between them, before it became something that had to be acknowledged or managed or stepped back from, Holt was at the door. "Rider coming in," he said. "From town." Both of them turned. "Who?" Elias said. "Don't know him, but he's riding Whitmore's horse." The kitchen went from warm to cold in the space of one breath. Elias moved first past Margaret, past Holt, out the door and into the yard. Margaret set the letters down and followed. The rider was a young man, neatly dressed, with the careful neutral expression of someone delivering a message he has been told to deliver without opinion. He handed Elias an envelope. Elias opened it. He read it. His face did not change. He handed it to Margaret. It was the acceleration notice, not triggered by the herd condition, as they'd expected, triggered by the boundary dispute. Whitmore had filed a formal challenge to the Thornton property boundary with the county land office that morning, within an hour of Margaret leaving his bank, and had used the existence of that dispute to invoke the impaired collateral clause in the note. 14 days, not from the end of the original term. 14 days from this morning. She looked at the date and time at the top of the notice. He had filed it while she was still sitting in his office, while she had been telling him about the 15 lawsuits. While she had thought she was reading him, he had already moved. She looked at Elias. He was watching her. "He filed it before I left his office," she said. "Yes, he let me make my case. He let me think I'd rattled him." She heard the steadiness in her own voice and was almost surprised by it. "And while I was talking, he was already executing the next step." "Yes." She looked at the notice again. 14 days. Grant was 4 days away. The Chicago letters would take 2 weeks. The injunction was possible, but it was not certain. And it required Grant to move the moment he arrived. And it required a judge to see the fraud argument clearly enough to grant a halt before the 14 days expired. It was not impossible. It was close. She folded the notice. "I need to write a third letter," she said. "To who?" Holt said. "To a man in Chicago named Walter Price. He was my father's business associate for 20 years. He knows every subsidiary, every investment structure, every financial connection my father had." She looked at Elias. "And he has been angry since my father died, because he believes someone helped him into a bad investment deliberately." She paused. "He has resources, and he has been waiting for someone to tell him where to look." Elias looked at her. "You've been sitting on this. I didn't know where to point him until this morning, and now you do. Now I know the subsidiary name. Now I know the cooperative. Now I know exactly what to tell him to find and where." She paused. "Walter Price does not wait 2 weeks for postal delivery. He sends men." Holt said. "How fast? If I send the letter today and he moves immediately, 10 days. Maybe 8. The notice expires in 14. I know. They all stood with that arithmetic for a moment. Then Elias said, "Write the letter." She was already walking back inside. She sat at the desk and wrote the third letter, the most important one. The one she should perhaps have written 3 weeks ago, but hadn't known yet that she needed to write. She wrote Walter Price the whole truth, laid out in the precise, organized way she had learned to write things when the stakes were too high for anything to be misunderstood. She sealed it. She held all 3 letters. Elias was in the doorway. She looked at him. "He's smarter than I gave him credit for," she said. "You gave him plenty of credit. Not enough. I thought I could rattle him into backing down. You rattled him. He filed the notice anyway. Because he's rattled." He looked at her steadily. A man who is comfortable doesn't file a notice 1 hour after a meeting. He waits. He lets it sit. He paused. He moved fast because you scared him. She looked at the letters in her hands. "I don't feel like I scared him." "No, but you did." She looked at him. He held her gaze steady, certain, the same look he'd given the east pasture, on the morning they'd first found. The herd was thin. The look of a man who has assessed a difficult situation and decided to stay in it. 14 days, she said. 14 days, she stood up. She was still in the blue jacket. She realized the good hat. The white gloves folded on the desk, beside her, the whole careful costume she'd dressed herself in that morning to walk into a man's office and try to outmaneuver him. She'd walked in thinking she held the advantage. She'd walked out holding a lean notice on her father's 40 acres and a 14-day clock. And yet she was still standing. She squared her shoulders. "I'll ride the letters to town myself," she said. "They need to go on today's post." "I'll ride with you," Elias said. "You don't?" "I know I don't." She looked at him. He looked back. She picked up her gloves. "Then let's go," she said. Aldous Grant arrived on Friday's stage 2 hours late, with a leather satchel and the unhurried manner of a man who has seen enough legal emergencies to understand that panic never helped a document. He was 50, gray at the temples, with sharp eyes behind wire spectacles, and the kind of handshake that communicated competence without effort. He read everything Margaret had assembled in 90 minutes, without interruption, while she and Elias sat across the kitchen table and did not fidget. At the end of 90 minutes, he set the last page down and looked at them both over his spectacles. "The injunction is possible," he said. "Hennessy's statement is strong. Bauer's testimony would need to be formalized. I'll need to speak with him tomorrow. The billing records are solid. The boundary discrepancy is documented." He paused. "The weak point is the subsidiary connection. Without the Chicago documentation, a judge could rule that the cooperative arrangement is a separate commercial matter, unrelated to the note." "Price's men are coming," Margaret said. 8 to 10 days. The notice expires in 12 days from today, I know. Grant looked at her. "You're asking me to file an injunction on incomplete evidence and hope that the remaining evidence arrives before the hearing. I'm asking you to file an injunction on substantial evidence and argue that the remaining evidence, which is in transit from Chicago, constitutes grounds for delay." She kept her voice level. "A territorial judge who understands that fraud documentation takes time to travel does not need the complete file in hand to grant a temporary halt. He needs sufficient cause." Grant looked at Elias. Elias said nothing. He had learned over the past 4 days when to let her speak. Grant looked back at Margaret. "You've done this before." "Not exactly this. But enough of it." He picked up his pen. "I'll draft the filing tonight. We submit Monday morning." Margaret exhaled, not visibly, not in a way the men could see, but the tightness across her shoulders eased by 1 degree. "Thank you," she said. "Don't thank me yet." He was already writing. "Whitmore will respond. He has connections with the county judiciary that I don't have, which is why we file at the territorial level." Grant looked up. "That's a significant escalation." "Yes. Whitmore will know you've gone over the county's head. He will not take that quietly, I know, Miss Ellison." He set the pen down. "When a man like Whitmore is cornered at the territorial level, he doesn't always respond through legal channels." The kitchen was quiet. Elias said, "I understand that. I wasn't speaking to you." Grant looked at Margaret. "You are the one who walked into his office. You are the one who showed him the Hennessy statement. In his mind, you are the problem that created this situation." He paused. I want to know that you understand what that means." She held his gaze. "It means I should be careful. It means you should be more than careful." She looked at him steadily. "I've been careful my whole life," she said. "It didn't prevent any of the things that have happened to me." She paused. "File the injunction." Grant looked at her for one more moment. Then he picked up the pen again. The weekend passed in a state of controlled tension that Margaret had learned. Over the past 3 weeks was simply the weather of this ranch, always something pressing. Always something requiring attention, never a morning that began with certainty about how it would end. She rode to Bauer's warehouse with Grant on Saturday morning and listened while the lawyer formalized the supplier's testimony into a signed affidavit. Bauer signed it with the look of a man who has been carrying something heavy for months and is relieved to set it down, even if the setting down came with its own risks. On the ride back, Grant said, "He's more afraid of Whitmore than he's showing. I know. If Whitmore pressures him before the hearing, Bauer has the billing records I gave him. He has documentation protecting himself from complicity charges. He has more to lose by recanting than by standing. Fear isn't always rational." "No," she said. "But Bauer is a practical man. Practical men can be steadied if you give them something to hold." Grant looked at her sideways. "You gave him the records specifically to give him a stake in this going forward. I gave him the records because he needed them." She paused. The stake was a secondary consideration. Grant said nothing. But she heard the small sound he made, which meant he was revising his assessment of her upward. Sunday was the day Whitmore made his next move. Not through a lawyer, not through a filing, through a conversation at the church in Millard Creek, where half the valley gathered on Sunday mornings and where Whitmore attended faithfully. Third pew from the front every week without fail. He spoke to 4 men after the service. Cord heard about it from his cousin who attended that church. And Cord, who had no filter, told Holt, and Holt told Elias that same afternoon. Whitmore had told all 4 men, each of whom held small notes with his bank, that the Thornton Ranch was in serious financial difficulty, that the situation was unlikely to resolve favorably, and that anyone who had business dealings with Thornton Ranch might want to consider their exposure carefully. He had not threatened anyone. He had simply spoken the words that, in a small valley, travel fast and do their own damage. Elias came to find Margaret in the kitchen. He told her. She listened. Then she said, "He's trying to isolate you." "Yes. If the men who do business with this ranch start pulling back the blacksmith, the supply merchants, anyone who extends seasonal credit, the operating situation worsens independently of the legal fight." "Yes." She thought for a moment. "Who are the 4 men he spoke to?" Elias told her. She knew 2 of the names from the land records she'd reviewed. Both had operated in the valley for more than 10 years. Both had children or relatives with adjacent property interests. "I need to speak with them," she said. "Margaret, not about the case. Not about Whitmore directly." She looked at him. "About what they stand to lose if a territorial fraud claim exposes the way Whitmore has been structuring notes in this county." He was quiet. "If his methods are examined in a territorial proceeding," she said, "every note he holds becomes questionable. Every boundary record connected to his land office appointments becomes questionable. The men who've been watching him accumulate property while they struggle to keep theirs." She paused. "They have a stake in this. They just don't know it yet. You want to organize them. I want to tell them the truth and let them make their own decisions." He looked at her for a long moment. "That's a harder case to make than you're describing. I know. Some of those men will be afraid. Some of them will choose Whitmore because they think he's winning, and they'd rather be on the side that wins." "Yes. And you're going to go anyway." She met his eyes. "I'm going to go anyway." He was quiet. "Then I'll come this time," she said. "Yes." The look that passed between them was not romantic. It was something older and steadier than romance. The look of 2 people who have been in the same difficulty long enough to know which fights they take separately and which ones they take together. They spent Monday morning at the territorial courthouse, watching Grant file the injunction. Whitmore's lawyer was there within 2 hours of fast. Polished man from Helena named Stokes, who had the practiced ease of someone who has met this situation before. He objected on 3 grounds. Grant answered all 3 without raising his voice. The judge, a deliberate white-haired man named Aldrin, who had been on the territorial bench for 16 years, read everything twice. Then he said, "I'm granting a 14-day stay pending review of the full fraud claim. Both parties will present complete documentation at a hearing 2 weeks from Thursday." Stokes said. "Your Honor, the note is stayed," Aldrin said, with the finality of a man who has made his decision and sees no reason to repeat it. 14 days. Outside on the courthouse steps, Grant allowed himself a brief moment of visible satisfaction. "That buys us to Thursday the 21st, he said. "Price's documentation needs to be here by Wednesday at the latest." "It will be," Margaret said. She said it with more certainty than she felt, but she said it. On the ride home, Elias said nothing for the first several miles. "Then, you were right about the territorial filing. We don't know that yet." Aldrin didn't hesitate. Aldrin saw sufficient cause. "That's not the same as winning." He was quiet for a moment. "I keep waiting for you to be wrong about something," he said. She looked at him. "I've been wrong about several things." "Name one." She thought about it honestly. "I thought I could walk into Whitmore's office and rattle him into withdrawal." She paused. "I rattled him into acceleration instead. That's not wrong. That's incomplete information. In practice, the result was the same." He shook his head slightly. She watched his profile, the jaw, the gray eyes on the road, the small, persistent set of his mouth that was the closest he came to an expression at rest. She had spent 3 weeks reading this man, and she was still finding things she hadn't read yet. It was a strange feeling, not uncomfortable, but unfamiliar. She was accustomed to understanding people quickly and then having nothing left to discover. "You built this ranch," she said suddenly. He looked at her. "You built it from what your father left after the dispute. You rebuilt it." She paused. "I know what it takes to rebuild something from what's left after someone's taken most of it. I know how long it takes and what it costs." She held his gaze. "You're not going to lose it." He was quiet. "You can't promise that," he said. "No." She looked back at the road. "But I'm telling you anyway." He said nothing more for the rest of the ride. But when they reached the ranch gate and he held it open for the wagon to pass through, he stayed there a moment longer than necessary, looking at the land that stretched out on both sides of the road, the dry grass, the fence lines, the distant roofline of the main house. She did not look back, but she was aware of him looking at it. And she understood what it meant to look at something you love and not yet know if you will keep it. The Price letter arrived on Wednesday. Not letters, a man. Walter Price himself. He arrived on the Tuesday evening stage, 1 day before his own correspondence, with a travel case and an expression that said he had not come to Montana for the scenery. He was 62, heavy-set, with white hair, and the particular authority of a man who has spent 40 years in business and has learned that his presence in a room is itself a form of argument. He walked into Thornton Ranch's kitchen, looked at Elias, looked at Margaret, and said, "Show me everything." He read for 2 hours. Margaret sat across from him and answered every question he asked, precisely and without softening anything. When he finished, he closed the last document and looked at her over the table. "Your father told me he'd found a good investment," he said. He was excited. He said the man who'd advised him was well connected and knew the territory. He paused. "I told him to get a second opinion, I know." He didn't. He trusted the connection. Price was quiet for a moment. "The subsidiary is a shell," he said. 3 layers of incorporation. But I had a man trace it to the source 6 months ago. I couldn't connect it to anything actionable at the time." He reached into his travel case and produced a folder. "I can connect it now. The originating entity is a land investment firm in Chicago that I can document has a direct financial relationship with A. H. Whitmore of Millard Creek, Montana." He set the folder on the table. Margaret did not reach for it immediately. She looked at Price. "Why did you come yourself?" "Because your father was my friend for 20 years. He looked at her steadily. "And because you're the one who found what I couldn't find from Chicago." He paused. "I came because you were right, and I wanted to see it finished." She picked up the folder. She opened it. It was complete, clean, documented across 12 pages with the kind of organized precision that comes from someone who has been preparing for this fight longer than she'd known there was a fight. She handed it to Elias. He read it. He handed it to Grant, who had been sitting quietly at the far end of the table throughout. Grant read it. Then Grant said, in the tone of a man who has practiced law for 25 years and does not use certain words lightly, "This is enough. They were wrong to feel safe. Not catastrophically wrong, not the kind of wrong that undoes everything but wrong, in the way that anyone is wrong who has won the necessary battle and assumes the enemy has therefore stopped moving." Thursday morning, 2 days before the hearing, Margaret went to the barn at her usual early hour. She found a note pinned to the barn door. No signature. No return, just 6 words in a careful neutral hand. "Withdraw the filing or lose the parcel." She stood there for a moment. Then she took the note and went to find Elias. He read it. His face did not change in any way she could read, which meant it had changed in a way he was controlling very deliberately. "He's threatening you directly," he said. "Yes. Holt needs to know." "And Grant?" "Yes." She looked at him. "I'm not withdrawing the filing, I know. I need you to know it clearly. He's threatening my parcel, the only thing I have from my father, and I am not withdrawing the filing." He looked at her. "I know," he said again. And then quietly, "Are you all right?" The question was simple. It was also the most direct personal question he had asked her in 4 weeks. And she felt it land differently than she expected, not intrusively, but the way you feel warmth from a fire when you've been cold long enough to forget what warmth felt like. She looked at the note in his hand. "I'm angry," she said honestly. I'm afraid, not of him. Of losing the 40 acres." She paused. "It's a bad piece of land with a leaking roof and a creek that runs low in summer. I know that, but it's the last thing my father chose. And I would like very much to keep it." Elias looked at her for a long moment. "You're going to keep it," he said. "We don't know, Margaret." His voice was steady and quiet and certain. "You are going to keep it." She held his gaze. She believed him. Not because it was guaranteed, but because she believed in the man saying it. And that was a thing she had not expected to feel about anyone in Montana. And possibly anywhere for a very long time. "All right," she said. He handed the note to Holt, who had appeared at some point during the conversation, and gave 3 quiet instructions: watch the road, watch the barn, and send Cord to ride the perimeter. Then he looked at Margaret. "Come on. Grant needs to see this." They walked to the house together. Grant took the note, read it, and added it to the file with the composed efficiency of a lawyer who has just been handed exactly the piece he needed. "Witness intimidation," he said. "If I can show this came from Whitmore or anyone acting on his behalf, it transforms the nature of the hearing." "Can you show it?" Elias said. "I can argue it. The timing 2 days before the hearing, after the injunction was granted, speaks clearly. A judge does not need a signature to draw the obvious conclusion." Price leaned forward. "I may be able to do better than argue it." He looked at Grant. "The Chicago firm that originated my father's loan, the Shell subsidiary, has a correspondence file. My man in Chicago has been reviewing it. There was a letter sent 3 weeks ago from the firm to Whitmore discussing the Montana proceedings." "How recent is that letter?" Grant said. "It predates the injunction by 4 days, which means Whitmore was in communication with the Chicago firm specifically about this case. Specifically in anticipation of a legal challenge." "Yes." Grant set down his pen. "Mr. Price, I need that letter at the courthouse Thursday morning. I've sent for it by telegraph. It should arrive by tomorrow evening." The kitchen was very quiet for a moment. Then Elias said, "He didn't know about Price." "No," Margaret said. "He planned for the lawyer. He planned for Hennessy. He planned for the billing records. He did not plan for the man who'd been tracking his Chicago connections for 6 months. "No," she said again. "That's the thing he didn't account for." She looked at him. "You didn't account for me either," she said. "At the beginning." He looked back at her. "No," he said. "I didn't." The word landed differently than agreement. It landed like an admission, the kind a private man makes when he has stopped being careful about what he reveals. She looked at the table. Price, across from them, said nothing. But he looked from one to the other with the expression of a man who has known Margaret Ellison since she was 19 years old, and is not surprised by what he's seeing, and is quietly, privately glad of it. The hearing was on a Thursday morning in a room that was not large enough for the number of people who came. 6 ranchers from the valley came without being asked, men who had spent the week hearing what Whitmore had said at the church and had done their own mathematics. Hennessy came. He sat in the front row and looked at the judge with the composure of a man who has already decided what he is willing to do and has no further conflict about it. Bauer came. He sat in the back row and looked at his hands. But he was there. Whitmore arrived with Stokes and two other men whose purpose was to demonstrate by their presence that Whitmore came to this proceeding backed by resources. Margaret sat beside Grant. Elias sat on her other side. Price sat behind them, directly, with his travel case on his knee, and the expression of a man attending a conclusion he has been working toward for some time. The telegraphed letter from Chicago had arrived the previous evening at 6 o'clock. Grant had read it twice. He had said, quietly, "This is enough and more." The hearing began. Grant presented in order the billing records, the cooperative arrangement, Bauer's affidavit, Hennessy's statement, and original survey record, the lien on the Ellison parcel and its connection to the Chicago subsidiary, Price's documentation of the subsidiary's relationship to Whitmore, and the Chicago letter establishing direct communication about the Montana proceedings. Then he presented the note pinned to the barn door. Stokes objected to the note's inclusion 3 times. Judge Aldrin overruled all 3. Whitmore, in the gallery, had not moved. His expression was the same it had been since he walked in, composed, attentive, the careful warmth of a man projecting confidence. But his hands folded in his lap were very still. Margaret noticed. She had learned to watch hands. Stokes made his argument the note was legitimately issued. The boundary dispute was a separate civil matter. The cooperative was a legitimate business interest with no provable connection to the note terms. It was a competent argument. It landed on a judge who had just spent 40 minutes reading 12 pages of documentation establishing the exact connection Stokes was denying. Judge Aldrin looked at Whitmore directly. "Mr. Whitmore, are you willing to testify today?" Stokes said. "Your Honor, I'm asking your client." Whitmore looked at the judge. For the first time, the warmth slipped, not disappeared, but slipped the way a mask shifts when the person wearing it gets tired. "On advice of counsel," he said, "I decline." The room moved, not loudly. The 6 ranchers in the gallery did not speak. But something changed in the room's quality, the way the air changes when a door opens somewhere you can't see. Judge Aldrin looked at the documentation for a moment. Then he said, "I am referring this matter to the Territorial Prosecutor's Office for investigation of potential fraud. In the interim, the acceleration notice is voided. The original note terms are restored with a 90-day extension. The boundary record is remanded for correction by the Territorial Land Surveyor. And the lien on the Ellison parcel is stayed pending investigation of the originating loan's terms." He looked at both tables. "This court is adjourned." He stood. Everyone else stood. And then, in the ordinary confusion of a courtroom returning to itself, people standing, papers gathering, chairs moving, Margaret sat very still for a moment. Elias beside her did not move either. She was aware of Price behind her, and Grant beside her, and Hennessy standing at the front, and all the men who had come from the valley, filling the room with their ordinary sounds. She was aware of all of it, and the only thing she felt clearly, distinctly, at the center of all of it, was Elias's hand, which had come to rest, at some point during the judge's ruling, on the back of her chair. Not touching her, but there, present, steady, the way he was steady. The way he had been steady since the first morning she'd ridden out before dawn, and he'd stood at the fence and said, "Better." She turned to look at him. He was looking at her. "It's not over," he said. "The investigation, I know. It'll take months. The prosecutor, I know." She held his gaze. "But we're still here." He looked at her, this woman in the blue jacket that had no business in Montana, who had arrived with 3 bags and a hatbox and a piece of land her father had overpaid for, who had read his documents and found his acceleration clause, and walked alone into a dangerous man's office and written 3 letters and stood beside him through 14 days of diminishing time, and he said nothing for a long moment. "Then when did you stop being afraid?" She considered it honestly. "I'm still afraid," she said. "I'm afraid of the investigation going wrong. I'm afraid of the lien. I'm afraid of..." She paused. "I'm afraid of quite a few things, but I stopped being afraid of this place." She looked at him steadily. "I came here thinking I was too good for it, that it was too rough and too hard and too far from everything I understood." He was very still. And then I realized, she said, that this place was exactly hard enough to show me what I was actually made of. She paused. I'd spent 27 years in drawing rooms being told to be careful. This is the first place that asked me to be useful. He looked at her. She looked back. I don't want to leave, she said. I want you to know that. Whatever happens with the parcel, whatever the investigation finds, I don't want to leave, he said. Then don't. 2 words. The same 2 words he'd said at the barn door the morning she'd left for Whitmore's office. But different now. She understood the difference. The 40 acres, she said. It's a bad piece of land, it is. The creek runs low in summer, every summer. The cabin needs a new roof. Next spring, he said. If we start the timber now. She looked at him. He looked back with the steadiness of a man who has said something he means precisely and does not feel the need to ornament it. Outside, through the courthouse window, she could hear the ordinary sounds of Millard Creek on a Thursday morning, a wagon. Someone's voice, the particular clean quality of Montana air in late summer. Inside, Price was talking to Grant. Hennessy was talking to one of the ranchers. Holt was standing by the door, with the expression of a man who is trying to look like he isn't paying attention to something. And failing, she said, the milking. He blinked. She's going to be unmanageable, Margaret said. We've been gone since morning. The corner of his mouth moved all the way this time, fully, unmistakably. She'll survive. She's very opinionated about scheduling. You've been managing her for 4 weeks. She respects you now. She tolerates me. That's respect. On this ranch he stood. Come on. He held out his hand. She looked at it for a moment, the working hand, the careful hand. The hand of a man who had built 1,000 acres and lost sleep over a 60-character clause, and said then don't with the quiet certainty of someone who does not say things he doesn't mean. She took it. They walked out of the courthouse together. Past Holt, who was definitely not watching. Past Price, who met her eyes over Elias's shoulder and gave her a look that was the compressed version of everything a man of 62 feels when he watches someone young enough to be his daughter make the right choice. Outside, the sun was still high. The road back to Thornton Ranch lay open and dry and ordinary, the way it had looked every morning for the 4 weeks she'd been driving it. She was still afraid of some things. She was not afraid of this road. A city girl, people had said, won't last 7 days. She had lasted 31. And the cowboy who'd said it to her face on a dusty platform, the one with the gray eyes and the barely there smile, and the quiet that turned out not to be coldness, but simply the patience of a man waiting to find out what a person was actually. Made of that cowboy had stopped saying it somewhere around day 3. He hadn't replaced it with anything for a long time. But today, walking beside her on a courthouse step in Millard Creek, Montana Territory, in the summer of 1887, he had offered her his hand. And she had taken it, and neither of them felt the need to say anything more about it. Some things don't require an announcement. They just require 2 people, and enough time, and the particular kind of difficulty that shows you who someone is when everything is on the line, and there is no version of the situation that is comfortable or safe. She had come here thinking she was out of place. She had been wrong about that, not because the place had changed, but because she had stopped measuring herself against a place she'd already left. This land was hard and dry and unglamorous, and it asked more of a person every morning than the city had asked of her in a year. She had given what it asked, and it had given her back something she had not known. She was missing the plain and solid knowledge of what she was worth, measured not in inheritance or address or the opinion of drawing rooms, but in the things she had actually done when the doing was required. That was worth 40 acres with a leaking roof. It was worth quite a bit more than that. The wagon was waiting. She climbed up. He climbed up beside her. She took the reins. He let her. They drove home.